The air in the service corridors of the Grand Elysian Hotel smelled of lemon-scented industrial cleaner, stale cigarette smoke, and the quiet desperation of underpaid staff. For Amara, hunched over a portable sewing machine in a converted linen closet, it mostly smelled like survival. The metallic tang of machine oil was the scent of another $250 earned, another fraction of a mountain of debt chipped away. Her world was this cramped, windowless room, a temporary outpost of competence tucked behind the glittering facade of the annual Starlight Gala. Her skin, the color of rich, dark soil after a rain, seemed to soak up the dim, fluorescent light. A few stray coils of her tightly wound hair had escaped the severe bun at the nape of her neck, haloing her face. Her uniform was a simple, functional black dress, a stark contrast to the couture confections gliding through the ballroom just 50 feet away. It was a uniform of invisibility, designed to blend into shadows and be forgotten. But her hands were another story. Long, elegant fingers, calloused at the tips, moved with a startling, hypnotic grace. They were hands that understood tension and thread, fabric and structure. They were the hands of an artist disguised as a repairwoman. Her eyes, watchful and intelligent, scanned the neat, almost military-precise rows of thread spools in her kit. Each was labeled, not by color, but by fabric type and tensile strength. Silk, chiffon, satin, wool crepe. It was a language of its own, a quiet testament to a skill far beyond the hotel's meager on-call retainer. The money wasn't for the skill, it was for her discretion and her speed. The number was always there, a low hum beneath her thoughts. $12,750. Not a vague, insurmountable sum, but a specific, horrifyingly concrete figure. The cost of the experimental treatment for her grandmother's pulmonary fibrosis. Nana Rose, who had raised her, whose hands were now gnarled and weak, whose breath came in ragged, painful gasps. Nana Rose, who thought Amara was a designer's assistant at a chic boutique. The lie was a small, necessary cruelty, a shield against the shame of this reality, the shame of being so capable, yet so trapped. The door to her closet office burst open, making her jump. Mr. Davies, the hotel's perpetually flustered events manager, stood panting in the doorway, his face slick with sweat, his tuxedo looking a size too tight. "Amara, thank God you're here." He wrung his hands, a gesture she'd come to associate with impending disaster. "Listen, the Kangs are here. Kang Dae-hyun and his entourage. The whole top floor is a fortress. His security detail swept the kitchens. Do you understand what that means?" Amara's hand stilled over her machine. "Yes, sir. It means I stay in this room unless the building is on fire." "Exactly," he hissed, relief washing over his face. "Be invisible. Don't exist. This isn't the usual tech billionaire crowd. These are serious people. One wrong move and we lose the account. I lose my job." He looked at her, but his eyes slid past, as if she were a piece of furniture. "Just stay put." He vanished, leaving the scent of his fear hanging in the air. Amara took a slow, deep breath. Kang Dae-hyun. The name was a whisper in the circles she had once known, a name spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence. The younger son of the Heidochi clan, a criminal organization that had consolidated the Busan ports with brutal efficiency. They were old rivals of the man who had raised her, a ghost from a life she had fled. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, surfaced. A large, masculine hand guiding her own small one, tying a complex series of knots with a length of silk cord. Chairman Park. "A knot is a promise, Amaraya." His gravelly voice had echoed in the quiet of his study. "Or a trap. You must learn to decide which it is, and how to tie both." He was a monster to the world, a Jopak boss who dealt in violence and fear. To her, the orphaned black girl left on his doorstep by a dying American soldier, he had been a protector, a teacher, a father. He had taught her strategy through games of Go, discipline through combat training, and fluency in a language and culture that were not her own. He had armed her for a world she never wanted to be a part of. She had run from that world, from the casual brutality and the gilded cage, seeking a quiet, anonymous life. But the past had long claws. And tonight, it seemed the past was a guest at the gala. A sudden commotion filtered through the door, a woman's shriek of outrage, sharp and piercing, followed by a ripple of shocked murmurs. It was the sound of manufactured crisis, the kind the very rich specialized in. Amara didn't need to be summoned. She knew the sound. It was the sound of her job. She stood, her movements economical and smooth. She selected a spool of ivory silk thread, a curved needle, and a thimble from her kit. She didn't wait for Mr. Davies to come running, his face a mask of panic. She was already moving, a shadow slipping out of a shadow's room, heading toward the noise. Proactive, prepared. It was the first rule of survival. Fix the problem before anyone has to ask. It made you valuable. It kept you employed. It paid for Nana Rose's next breath. The grand ballroom of the Elysian was a galaxy of shimmering gowns and black tie suits, lit by the gentle glow of a dozen crystal chandeliers. The air smelled of money, a heady mix of expensive perfume, premium scotch, and the faint, clean scent of ozone from the air purifiers. But the universe had frozen, all celestial bodies orbiting a single, furious star. Her name was Lee Min-seo. Amara knew the type instantly. The wife of a man whose importance was newer and more fragile than her own inherited wealth. Her beauty was sharp, angular, and currently twisted into a mask of theatrical fury. She stood near the entrance to the terrace, one hand clutching the side of her gown, a magnificent custom-made creation of ivory silk, designed to evoke a modern hanbok. A long, jagged tear ran from her hip down her thigh, a catastrophic failure of a seam. Incompetent fools! Min-seo's voice was a shrill weapon, slicing through the polite hum of the party. This gown cost more than your car, more than your house. She was addressing a young waiter who stood frozen, a tray of empty champagne flutes trembling in his hands. He hadn't touched her, but he was the nearest target, and therefore, the cause. Mr. Davies was already there, bowing and scraping. Madam Lee, my deepest apologies. 1,000 apologies. We will handle this immediately. His eyes darted around, desperately seeking a solution. They landed on Amara, who stood quietly at the edge of the chaos, her small kit held discreetly in one hand. Relief and terror warred on his face. He gestured frantically. Amara moved forward, the crowd parting for her like water around a stone. She kept her eyes downcast, her posture deferential. She was a tool being brought to a task. Min-seo's gaze fell upon her, and her lip curled in disgust. Her? The word dripped with venom. You want her to touch my dress? Look at her. What could she possibly know about couture? She switched to Korean, her voice loud and performative, meant for her companion, a woman dripping in diamonds. They sent me a stray dog from the alley. Look at those hands. They probably smell of grease. Amara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She didn't react. Her face remained a neutral mask. She had heard worse in this language and her own. Dignity was a luxury she couldn't afford. Survival was the currency she dealt in. Ma'am, Amara's voice was quiet, steady. If you'll allow me, I can fix it. Min-seo laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Fix it? Here? Like some street peddler? But the alternative was to leave, to admit defeat, and her pride wouldn't allow that. Her eyes narrowed. A cruel, playful light entered them. Fine, but you will do it properly. On your knees. A collective intake of breath rippled through the onlookers. Mr. Davies looked like he was going to be sick. This was no longer a repair. It was a performance of humiliation. Amara looked at the cold, polished marble floor. $12,750. She felt the weight of every single cent. 3 seconds. That's what she gave herself. 3 seconds to swallow the acid bile of her own pride. 3 seconds to kill the part of her that wanted to scream, to fight, to show this woman what her hands were truly capable of. 3 seconds to become invisible again. 1. The echoing memory of Chairman Park's voice. Control is not about shouting. It is about silence. It is about making your opponent reveal their own weakness. 2. Nana Rose's face, her smile weak but loving, her breath a constant painful struggle. 3. The decision was made. Without a word, Amara sank to her knees. The cold of the marble seeped through the thin fabric of her dress, a chilling shock against her skin. She ignored the whispers, the averted eyes of the other guests. Their pity was useless. She opened her kit. The tools of her trade were her shield. Min-seo was not finished. As Amara prepared the needle, The woman turned to her friend again, her voice a conspiratorial, mocking whisper in rapid-fire Korean. My husband Jae-wook is so stressed. This Busan port deal with the city council. So many palms to grease. He had to falsify the environmental reports for the dredging. Can you imagine the scandal? He says, as long as the Haedochi clan doesn't find out before the signing, we'll be untouchable. He's meeting Director Kim tomorrow at the Blue Lotus to finalize the payments. She punctuated the sentence by deliberately knocking a half-full glass of iced champagne from a passing waiter's tray. The frigid liquid splashed down Amara's back, soaking her dress, the shock of it making her gasp. Ice cubes slithered down her spine. Minseo laughed. Oops! So clumsy of me? Amara froze. Her head was bowed, hiding her eyes. The cold was a physical blow, a final deliberate cruelty. For a moment, everything stopped. The chatter of the gala, the clinking of glasses, the soft music, all of it faded into a dull roar. There was only the freezing liquid sticking her dress to her skin, the sharp pain in her knees from the hard floor, and the woman's smug, ugly laughter. And the words she had just spoken, careless and confident in their assumption of ignorance. Falsified environmental reports, the Haedochi clan, Director Kim, the Blue Lotus. It wasn't just gossip, it was intelligence. It was a weapon, dropped carelessly at her feet. From across the room, a man watched. He had been watching since the commotion began. He stood flanked by two other men in identical dark suits, their stillness a stark contrast to the nervous energy of the party. His own suit was a masterpiece of charcoal gray tailoring, the kind of garment that whispered its expense rather than shouting it. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe watch, a timepiece that could have paid for Nana Rose's treatment 10 times over. His hair was black, impeccably styled. But it was his eyes that held the room. They were cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of emotion. He was Kang Dae-hyun, and he saw everything. He saw the cruelty, he saw the subservience, and he saw the moment the seamstress's shoulders went rigid under the splash of champagne, a flicker of something hard and dangerous beneath the mask of meekness. He saw the shift. Amara's hands began to move. They were trembling, but not from fear or cold. It was the trembling of a compressed spring, of energy held in violent check. Her needle dipped and rose, a tiny silver fish in a sea of ivory silk. The stitches were impossibly small, perfect, pulling the torn edges of the fabric together, leaving a seam that was stronger and less visible than the original. She worked in a bubble of intense, furious focus. Each stitch was a tiny act of rebellion, each perfect knot, a silent promise to herself. This will not be the end of me. She finished. The seam was flawless. Amara took a breath, held it, and then slowly, deliberately, rose to her feet. The movement was not the scramble of a servant. It was the unfolding of something that had been coiled too tightly. She stood straight, her shoulders square, and for the first time, she lifted her head and met Lee Min-seo's eyes. The mask was gone. The tear is mended, Madam Lee, Amara said, her voice still quiet, but now laced with something cold and sharp. Min-seo, thrown off by the sudden change in posture, scoffed. About time. Now get out of my sight. She turned to her friend, ready to launch into another tirade in Korean, a final twist of the knife. This trash took so long, I almost... A thread that loose could unravel the whole garment, Amara cut in, her Korean flawless, formal, and carrying the unmistakable, hard-edged accent of Busan, the dialect of the docks, the dialect of the Haedochi clan. Much like a careless tongue. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb being disarmed, wire by crucial wire. Every head turned. Min-seo's perfectly made-up face went slack with shock, the color draining from it as if a plug had been pulled. Her friend's diamond earrings seemed to tremble. Even the air seemed to have frozen. Min-seo stared, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. You understand? She stammered in Korean, the question a ragged whisper. Amara gave a small, chillingly polite smile. Just a seamstress with good ears, madam. She switched back to English, her voice carrying across the silent room. And a very good memory for things like dredging reports and meetings at the Blue Lotus. Panic, pure and undiluted, flared in Min-seo's eyes. This was impossible. This was a nightmare. The serving girl, the black woman, the invisible menial was speaking her language, her husband's secrets, back to her. She grasped for control, her voice rising to a screech. "Security! Get this spy out of here. She's threatening me. Do you know who my husband is?" But no one moved. All eyes were now on the other center of gravity in the room. Kang Dae-hyun began to walk. He didn't hurry. His steps were measured, deliberate, each one landing with an audible weight on the marble floor. The crowd parted for him, a silent, fearful wave. He stopped not in front of Min-seo, but beside Amara. He didn't look at the hysterical woman. His cold, dark eyes were fixed on Amara's. It was not a look of pity or rescue. It was a look of assessment, of recognition. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." Dae-hyun's voice was quiet, almost conversational, yet it commanded the attention of the entire room. He spoke in English, for the benefit of the wider audience. He gestured almost dismissively at Min-seo. "This woman and her husband, Lee Jae-wook of Sunwoo Logistics, are not friends of my family." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Then he turned his gaze to Min-seo, and for the first time, he spoke in Korean, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "Your husband's ambition has become a nuisance, and your voice is unpleasant. You should leave. Now." It was a command, not a suggestion. Min-seo, shattered and exposed, stumbled backward, grabbing her friend's arm. She shot a look of pure hatred at Amara before practically fleeing the ballroom, a whirlwind of ruined silk and public disgrace. The party slowly, awkwardly, began to breathe again. Mr. Davies looked like he had aged 10 years. Dae-hyun's attention returned to Amara. The air between them was charged. He saw the damp patch on the back of her simple black dress, the proud, rigid set of her shoulders. He saw the fire banked in her eyes. "You have good ears," he said again, this time in Korean, the phrase no longer a simple observation, but a statement of fact. "Just a seamstress, sir," she replied, the words now dripping with an irony so heavy it was almost a physical weight. "My car is waiting," he stated. "We have things to discuss." It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Amara met his gaze without flinching. Her mind was racing. Chairman Park's world had found her, but this time, she wasn't a frightened child. She was a woman with a weapon. "Protection isn't what I'm looking for," she said, her voice low and firm. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, crossed his face. "What then?" "Justice," Amara said, "and a stage." The ride was silent. The interior of the black Maybach was a cocoon of sumptuous leather and polished dark wood, gliding through the city streets with a silence that felt absolute. Amara sat opposite Kang Dae-hyun, the space between them humming with unspoken questions. His two men sat in the front, rigid and silent as statues. Amara stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of neon. The adrenaline from the ballroom was fading, replaced by a cold, clear-headed resolve. She had crossed the line. There was no going back to the quiet anonymity of her linen closet office. She had stepped out of the shadows, and in doing so, had painted a target on her back. Lee Min-seo and her husband would not let her public humiliation go unanswered. Dae-hyun broke the silence. He spoke in Korean, his tone measured, devoid of emotion. "Chairman Park, you grew up in his household." It wasn't a question. Amara turned from the window to face him. Her posture was relaxed, but her hands were still in her lap, a sign of control, not submission. "He took me in when I was a child. He was my guardian." The word felt inadequate, a pale summary of a brutally complex relationship. "He is my father's enemy," Dae-hyun stated, his eyes searching her face for a reaction. The Haidochi clan and Park's organization, the Cheong-ryong, had been locked in a cold war for control of Seoul's underworld for 2 decades. "I am aware," Amara replied calmly. "I left that life 8 years ago. I have no loyalty to the Cheong-ryong." "And to the Haidochi?" Amara held his gaze. "I have loyalty to my grandmother's well-being, and to the principle that people like Lee Min-seo should not be able to pour champagne on a woman's back and get away with it." A long beat of silence. He seemed to be weighing her, calculating her value, her potential threat. The watch on his wrist caught the light, its intricate face a map of gears and levers, a machine of precision. Like him. "Sunwoo Logistics," he said, changing the subject. Their bid for the Busan port expansion is underwritten by a faction hostile to us. Lee Jae-wook is their public face. We knew he was corrupt, but we lacked concrete proof to move against him without igniting an open war with our rivals. The information you overheard, it is the key. Information is only valuable if you know how to use it, Amara countered. A blunt attack will be traced back to you. The police will get involved. It will be messy. You'll win the battle, but the war will become more complicated. Dae-hyun leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued. This was not the response of a simple informant looking for a payout. This was the thinking of a strategist. You have a different approach in mind? Min Seo's pride is her weakness. Her husband's ambition is his. They live in a world of appearances. You don't need to send men with guns. You need to shatter the illusion they've built around themselves. Humiliation is a sharper blade than a knife, and it leaves no fingerprints. She was echoing Chairman Park's teachings, the lessons she'd tried so hard to forget, but which were now rising to the surface, as essential as breathing. You want revenge, he surmised, his voice flat. I want justice, she corrected him softly. Revenge is a fire that burns the one who holds it. Justice is a foundation you can build on. She thought of Nana Rose, of the life she wanted for her, a life of peace and security. That required more than a one-time act of vengeance. It required a fundamental shift in power. Sunwoo Logistics is your problem. Lee Min-seo is mine. Their fates are intertwined. You provide the resources, the access. I provide the strategy. It's a trade, not a gift. He was silent for another long moment, his cold eyes unblinking. He was seeing her now, not as a victim or an anomaly, but as a player, an asset, perhaps even an equal. The dynamic in the car had shifted. It was no longer a rescue. It was a negotiation. What do you need? He finally asked. The question was the beginning. It was the sound of a door opening, a door back into a world she had sworn to leave behind. But this time, she would not be a pawn or a protected child. She would be the one moving the pieces. Everything you know about Lee Jae-wook, his company, his partners, and his schedule, she said, her voice firm, and a secure line of communication, a laptop, a place to work, and I want your word that my grandmother will be protected, absolutely. It will be done, he said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek, impossibly thin burner phone, placing it on the polished wood console between them. This is for you. My personal number is the only one in it. You will be taken to a secure apartment. Anything you require will be provided. He was providing the platform. She would provide the plan. The next few days were a blur of intense, focused work. The apartment was a minimalist suite high in a skyscraper overlooking the Han River, all glass and steel, with biometric security. It was another gilded cage, but this one felt different. It felt like a command center. Dae-hyun's organization was ruthlessly efficient. Within hours, encrypted files began flooding the laptop they had provided. Financial records, surveillance photos, background checks, the entire digital life of Lee Jae-wook and his circle. Amara worked relentlessly, fueled by black coffee and a cold, burning anger. She wasn't just a girl who could sew and speak Korean. Chairman Park's education had been unorthodox and brutal, but it had been thorough. She had been trained in forensic accounting, in pattern recognition, in untangling complex networks of shell corporations and offshore accounts. She sifted through the data, her mind a fine-toothed comb, finding the loose threads in the fabric of Jae-wook's empire. She found more than just the falsified dredging reports. She found evidence of illegal labor practices, of kickbacks to city officials, of massive systemic fraud. Jae-wook wasn't just a corrupt executive, he was a cancer. And Lee Min-seo, with her performative cruelty and lavish spending, was a symptom of the disease. One afternoon, Amara decided she needed to get closer. The digital world was one thing, but the physical world held different secrets. She left the apartment, informing Dae-hyun's men she was going to retrieve her belongings from the hotel. It was a plausible excuse. Dressed once more in a simple, anonymous outfit, she navigated the service corridors of the Grand Elysian, a ghost in her former haunting grounds. But this time, she was not invisible. She was a predator. She sought out the people who, like her, were trained to see everything and be seen by no one. The housekeepers, the valets, the kitchen staff. She didn't bribe them with money. She spoke to them with respect, in a mix of English and casual Korean. She shared a coffee with a Filipina housekeeper who complained about the state Minseo always left her suite in. She commiserated with a young valet who Jae-wook had berated for being too slow. She listened. They were the true surveillance system of the hotel. From them, she learned of Jae-wook's secret meetings, not just at the Blue Lotus, but in private suites booked under other names. She learned of his nervous tics, his favorite scotch, his paranoid fear of being watched. She gathered the human intelligence that gave context to the digital data, painting a complete, damning portrait of the man. This was her solo operation, a demonstration of her unique value. She understood the power of the powerless. She was returning to the apartment, the new information a live current under her skin, when the burner phone rang. It was Dae-hyun. His voice was flat, but she could hear a new tension in it. "There is a problem." "What is it?" "An anonymous complaint was filed with the City Housing Authority about your grandmother's apartment building. Structural instabilities, code violations. A full inspection has been ordered. An inspector is there now, telling residents the building is likely to be condemned." The blood drained from Amara's face. It was Minseo. It had to be. A petty, vicious retaliation aimed at the one place Amara was vulnerable. Her first instinct was panic, a white-hot flash of terror for Nana Rose. "My men are on their way to the building now," Dae-hyun continued. "They will persuade the inspector to reconsider his assessment." Persuade. She knew what that meant in his world. Broken bones, threats, a crude application of force. It would work for now, but it was loud. It would draw attention. It was his way, the way of the hammer. "No," Amara said, her voice sharp. The decision was instant, intuitive. "Call them off. Do not let them engage. This is my domain." There was a pause on the other end of the line. She was countermanding an order from the head of the Haidochi clan. "Explain," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "A hammer can't fix a watch," she said, her mind racing, connecting threads from a life she thought she'd left behind. "This requires a scalpel. Let me handle it." She hung up before he could argue. She immediately scrolled through her personal phone's contacts, her fingers stopping on a name she hadn't called in years. Mr. Choi. A mid-level official in the city planning department. A man whose career had been saved from a gambling scandal by a quiet word from Chairman Park 2 decades ago. A debt that had never been called in. She took a deep breath and dialed. "Mr. Choi," she began in formal Korean when he answered. "My name is Amara. I am calling on behalf of Chairman Park. I believe you remember him." The silence on the other end was profound. Then a shaky, respectful, "Yes, of course. How may I be of service?" She explained the situation calmly, factually. The building, the sudden inspection, the name of the inspector. She didn't have to imply the threat. The ghost of Chairman Park did it for her. 20 minutes later, her personal phone rang. It was Mr. Choi. The inspector had been pulled from the site. An internal investigation had been opened into his history of soliciting bribes. The complaint against Nana Rose's building was dismissed, citing malicious intent. It was over, cleanly, silently. She called Dae-hyun back on the burner. "The situation is resolved," she said. The line was silent for a full 10 seconds. She could almost hear the gears turning in his head. She hadn't just used his resources. She had used her own, a network he couldn't access, a history he couldn't replicate. She hadn't needed his muscle. She had saved him from making a move that could have exposed his organization. "How?" he finally asked. "I told you," she said, a small, cold smile touching her lips. "This is my domain." In that moment, she wasn't just an asset. She was a strategic equal. She might have even saved him. The final piece of the plan came together a week later. Lee Jae-wook was hosting a major conference for potential international investors, the culmination of his years of scheming. It was to be his coronation, the moment he secured the funding that would make him untouchable. Dae-hyun's intel confirmed that the final contracts for the Busan port deal would be signed there. Dae-hyun's proposed strategy was simple and direct, a hostile takeover. Use the information Amara had gathered to blackmail key shareholders, crash the stock price, and buy up a controlling interest in the chaos. It was a classic corporate raid, backed by the implicit threat of violence. Amara read the proposal in her apartment, the city lights glittering below. It was a good plan, a strong plan, but it wasn't her plan. She requested a face-to-face meeting. Dae-hyun arrived alone this time, without his usual sentinels. He stood by the vast window, a dark silhouette against the sprawling metropolis. "Your plan will work," Amara began, her voice calm and measured. "It will destroy him financially, but it won't give me what I want." He turned to face her. "And what is that?" "I want her to see my face when her world burns down," Amara said, her voice dropping, the raw emotion finally showing through. "I want him to be standing on his victory stage when the floor gives way. Your plan is a backroom deal. It's quiet, efficient. My justice needs to be loud. It needs to be public. It needs to be a performance." She laid out her counterproposal. They would let the conference proceed. They would let Jae-wook get on that stage, let him taste the victory, and at the peak of his triumph, they would pull the thread. "I will be there," she said, "in the front row. And when he is at his most arrogant, when she is basking in his reflected glory, we will replace his presentation with the truth, the fraud, the kickbacks, the environmental crimes. We will project it onto a 50-foot screen behind him. We will not just bankrupt him, we will obliterate him, socially, professionally, and legally." Dae-hyun was silent, considering it. His way was a show of force. Her way was a show of finesse. His was a hammer. Hers was a trap, constructed of an enemy's own pride and ambition. "It's riskier," he said. "More variables, more public exposure." "It's better," she countered. "Your way makes you a predator. My way makes you a force of order. It provides a public justification for whatever move you make on Sunwoo Logistics afterward. You won't be a corporate raider. You'll be the cleanup crew, restoring stability. It's cleaner, and it is the only way this ends for me." She was overruling him. The quiet seamstress was dictating strategy to the head of a crime family. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the battle between his instinct for brutal control and his newfound respect for her strategic mind. He looked at her, at the unwavering resolve in her gaze, and saw not a subordinate, but a partner, a queen to his king. "Fine," he said, the word a quiet concession that felt like a tectonic shift. "We do it your way." The day of the conference, Amara looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was someone she barely recognized. The simple black uniform was gone, replaced by an impeccably tailored modern hanbok of deep sapphire silk. It was a garment of power, not of service. A gift from Dae-hyun, but one she had selected herself, its lines clean, sharp, and commanding. Her hair was styled in an elegant upsweep, showcasing the proud line of her neck. Her makeup was minimal, but flawless. She was no longer a shadow. She was the blade emerging from it. Dae-hyun's men were waiting for her in the lobby. They were her escort, but their deference was new. They no longer looked at her as a package to be protected, but as a commander to be obeyed. She walked ahead of them, her back straight, her steps echoing the same measured confidence she had seen in Dae-hyun. The conference hall was buzzing, a hive of ambition and expensive cologne. Lee Jae-wook was on a low stage at the front, schmoozing with investors, his face flushed with impending triumph. And beside him, preening in a garish gold dress, was Lee Min-seo. She was the queen of this small, corrupt court. Amara moved down the central aisle. Her entrance did not go unnoticed. A ripple of whispers followed her. Who was she? The stunning black woman in the sapphire hanbok, moving with the grace of a panther. A seat in the front row, marked with the name of a shell corporation Dae-hyun had set up, was empty. Her seat. She sat down. And then she lifted her eyes and looked directly at Min-seo. For a moment, there was nothing. Then recognition dawned on Min-seo's face, followed by sheer, uncomprehending shock. Her smile froze, faltered, and collapsed. She saw the kneeling seamstress, the invisible girl, now seated in the place of an honored guest, wearing a gown that outshone her own, radiating an aura of absolute power, the world tilted on its axis. Jae-wook, oblivious, took the stage to a round of applause. The lights dimmed. His presentation began, a series of slick graphs and optimistic projections appearing on the massive screen behind him. He spoke of growth, of profit, of a bright new future for Sunwoo Logistics. Amara held up a small, discreet tablet in her lap. On its screen was a single red button. Her finger hovered over it. She waited. She let him build his own scaffold. And so, Jae-wook announced, his voice booming with false confidence, with the finalization of the Busan port contract, Sunwoo Logistics is poised for an unprecedented decade of expansion. That was the cue. Amara pressed the button. The screen behind Jae-wook flickered. The profit projections vanished. In their place, a bank statement appeared, showing a multi-million-dollar transfer to a city councilman's offshore account. It was followed by an internal email written by Jae-wook himself, authorizing the falsification of environmental reports. Then, surveillance photos of him passing a briefcase to a known gangster. Document after document, a cascade of irrefutable proof, all packaged and curated by Amara, played out in damning silence. The hall went dead quiet. Jae-wook froze, his mouth agape. He turned to look at the screen, and the color drained from his face. He looked out at the sea of stunned, horrified investors. Amara stood up. In the dead, suffocating silence, her voice, calm and clear, carried without a microphone. She did not speak to the crowd. She spoke only to the woman who had tried to break her. She spoke in Korean. "You said my hands were only good for mending," Amara said, her eyes locked on Min Seo's. "You were wrong. They are also good for unraveling." The spell broke. Jae-wook, in a blind panic, spun around and lunged for the tech booth as if he could physically stop the flow of information. Two of Do-hyun's men, disguised as hotel security, stepped into his path, blocking him effortlessly. Min Seo, however, had only one target. Her face a twisted mask of pure rage, she let out an incoherent shriek and launched herself off the stage, claws out, directly at Amara. Amara didn't even flinch. As Min Seo reached her, she moved with a speed and precision that was terrifying. She sidestepped the clumsy attack, caught Min Seo's wrist, and twisted. It was a simple fluid wrist lock, a technique Chairman Park had drilled into her 1,000 times. There was a sickening pop as the bone dislocated. Min Seo crumpled to the ground, screaming now in pain, not rage. The humiliation was absolute, public, physical. The investors were already fleeing, a panicked exodus of capital. At the back of the hall, the doors opened and uniformed police officers began to file in, moving with calm, deliberate purpose. They had received a very detailed, very credible anonymous tip. They were the cleanup crew. Jae-wook was apprehended. As a paramedic tended to Min Seo, she looked up, her face streaked with tears and makeup, her eyes wild with desperation. She saw Amara standing over her, a figure of calm, righteous judgment. "Please," Min Seo begged, her voice a pathetic rasp. "I'll give you anything. Money, please." Amara looked down at the broken woman on the floor, the source of her deepest humiliation, now utterly destroyed at her feet. She felt nothing. No pity, no triumph, just quiet. "You have nothing I want," Amara said. She turned and walked away, not looking back. 6 months later. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and commerce. Amara stood on the observation deck of the newly acquired Hedochi Global Logistics Terminal at the port of Busan. She wore a sharp navy blue business suit, her hair pulled back professionally. In her hand, she held a tablet displaying shipping routes and cargo manifests. This was her domain now. Dae-hyun hadn't just given her a title, Director of Strategic Operations. He had given her a kingdom to run. Using her analytical skills, she had completely overhauled their logistics, untangling the snarled mess left by Sunwoo and weaving it into a model of brutal efficiency. She had identified new routes, streamlined customs procedures, and integrated tracking systems that were years ahead of their competitors. The Haedochi clan was making more legitimate money than they ever had through crime. She was transforming them. A brief chime from her phone. She swiped it open. A video call from Nana Rose. Her grandmother's face filled the screen, fuller and healthier than it had been in years. She was in a bright, sunny room in a top-tier residential care facility, a paintbrush in her hand, a vibrant canvas behind her. "Look, baby," Nana Rose said, her voice clear, her breath even. "I'm painting the ocean." Amara smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. "It's beautiful, Nana." They talked for a few minutes, about art, about the weather, about the good food, about a life free from the shadow of debt and fear. This was the victory. This was the prize. After she ended the call, she stood watching the massive container ships being loaded and unloaded by colossal cranes, a perfectly synchronized ballet of global trade that she now conducted. She heard a single footstep behind her and knew, without turning, that it was him. Kang Dae-hyun. He came to stand beside her, his presence a familiar, grounding weight. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the work. He didn't speak of the past. He didn't offer words of praise or affection. Instead, he held out a pair of high-powered binoculars. She took them. "The new cranes arrived from Hamburg on Tuesday," he said, his voice a low rumble beside her. "Your routing plan saved us 3 days and nearly $1 million in fuel costs." It was his version of a love letter. Acknowledgement, recognition, respect. It was more intimate than any touch. She lifted the binoculars to her eyes, focusing on a ship disappearing over the horizon. "Chairman Park taught me every knot is a promise or a trap," she said, more to herself than to him. "He never said you could use them to build an anchor." He didn't reply. He just watched her, a rare, almost imperceptible smile touching the corners of his mouth, a smile that only she would ever notice. He wasn't looking at the port, at the empire they were building. He was looking at her, the architect of it all, the woman who had been invisible, now the most powerful force in his world. She had not been given this power. She had earned it, stitch by painful stitch. What would you build if someone finally saw your hands for what they could truly do?